Hey there. Yeah, just here doing another little tour for you, huh? Today we're in Queens. I'm gonna do the neighborhood of Forest Hills. Now, you may have heard the word before, you may not have made it all the way out here. But Forest Hills has a really interesting history, beautiful, unique development, unique architecture. It's got music history, it's got architectural history. But before we start, Pat, how the hell are you?
I'm great. How are you?
I am great. Thank you so much for asking. You know, it's gonna be a nice little walk today. Before we start, guys, check out the Patreon. Huge help. That's how I fund these things. Also, you know, like and subscribe. If you've seen one of these before, you're gonna like it too. So you might as well just do it, get out of the way. That way you can just sit back and enjoy. But that being said, guys, we gotta get going, man. We got a lot to cover. Pat, what do you think?
Let's go, baby.
Let's go down the magic merry way. All right. All right, so I'm sitting here in Forest Park. This is where Forest Hills gets its name. Now, it's important to remember that the area here was all inhabited by Native Americans initially, the Lenape, also the Rockaway Indians. It's pronounced Rockaway, but it's not actually spelled that. It's spelled like this, but I'm sure it's not pronounced Rekawaki. Ain't them there Rekawaki Indians. It's actually, I guess Rockaway is the closest thing, but you get it. Anyways, it was countryside. This was all countryside until the 1900s. There was farms and things like that, and it got developed a little later. This is called Forest Park. It's called that because guess why, Pat?
It's a park, and it's in the forest.
You're a smart man. It's a park with a huge forest in it. It's named that for the trees. I guess some history is pretty self-explanatory. So yeah, lots of different trees in this area. This was actually designed, believe it or not, by Frederick Law Olmsted and Calvert Vaux. Yeah, the two designers of Central Park, pretty cool. And this was actually, in 1895 it was open. 1898 it was pulled in, Queens was pulled in as part of the consolidation. Talked about this in lots of videos. But this was actually administered by Brooklyn, the Brooklyn Parks Department, until 1911 when Queens got its own Parks Department. So this is kind of on the cusp here of Queens and Brooklyn. There's a 114-acre golf course in here, still there. 72 par 72 golf course. You can go, you know, whack the old ball around, as the kids say, the golf playing kids say. So Forest Park is actually where Forest Hills gets its name, but this whole area used to be called White Pot. They believe derived from Weissput, which is like a white pit, because a lot of the clay that was here from a stream that passed through the area. They believe that's one of the theories. Yeah, White Pot's a little silly, I guess, of a name, but it could have been worse. I guess they could have called it Pol Pot. You know, I guess that would have been a weirder name for the neighborhood, but it eventually get it renamed through Forest Hills. We'll talk about that on our next stop. But yeah, this is Forest Park, thick with woods. So you walk around here, you think you're gonna stumble onto the Unabomber's cabin or something, but it's actually pretty nice. You kind of get lost in the woods, a few hundred acres, nice little place to kind of hang out and ride your bike around and almost run over people on the sidewalks in here. And there's a little building known as Oak Ridge that was built in 1905 that used to be the actual clubhouse to the golf course. That's right, used to be the 19th hole. That's where you'd go with all your chums and your bros and make fun of each other for spending so much time in that sand trap. What are you doing over there, huh? What are you, a lifeguard, huh? What's going on? Anyways, today it's where the Queens, I guess the Parks Department office for this park is located. So, kind of cool. I don't know, man. We got a lot to cover. This area's gonna get developed. Remember, it was farmland, a lot of farmland. It was all wilderness, I guess, until it got developed. We'll talk about that as we go. Let's go. I'm getting bit by mosquitoes and termites are crawling up my pants. Okay, so Queens was developed a little later than Manhattan and Brooklyn. One of the reasons was because it wasn't connected to Manhattan. It was also further away from New York City in the 1800s, but in the late 1800s, early 1900s, there was rumblings. Queens was actually became part of New York City in 1898, the consolidation. Remember, I talk about this in freaking every video. But also in 1909, you had the Queensboro Bridge finished, the first real connection there to Manhattan. Now, because of all these things, you had people start to speculate in the early 1900s, starting to buy up land. One of those people bought up a lot of land here in this neighborhood. His name was Cord Meyer. Yeah, it's a strange name, Cord. You don't hear that very often anymore. You don't overhear anyone saying, you know, I had this great Tinder date with this guy Cord. He's an accountant. Didn't look anything like his picture. But, you know, I guess it's the name of the time. But you might recognize his name from Elmhurst. I talked about it in my Elmhurst video. You can watch that. But the guy bought up a ton of Elmhurst, developed that area in the late 1800s, early 1900s. With some of that money, he came over here to what is Forest Hills today and bought up like 600 acres. In fact, I'm standing in front of one of the few row houses left here on 72nd Ave between Austin and Queens Boulevard. He had a whole row of these things built in 1909. We're the oldest buildings in the neighborhood. Yeah, doesn't look like much anymore, unfortunately. Looks like, you know, there's gonna be an old guy with like an eye patch come out, you know, and, you know, throwing like a pitchfork at us or something. But, you know, they're demolishing them for nicer stuff, I guess. But this is kind of what happened. This guy saw an opportunity and started buying up land. Later on, a little bit later on, other people would buy his land and develop it further. He bought it from farmers who were here. This was all kind of farmland, which I kind of already talked about. Now the Meyer family of Cord Meyer, they actually had a lot of money. He came from his parents' money, which was sugar refining and fertilizer. Yeah, that's an interesting mix. I hope they didn't get those containers mixed up, huh? How do you take your coffee? With a bunch of horse? But he got his money, started developing real estate, like I said, Elmhurst. He actually bought a lot of the land in Elmhurst from Samuel Lord of Lord and Taylor. I guess he could use that land now as some assets for his company because Lord & Taylor, like most department stores, is failing. Sad, very sad, but he developed Elmhurst, then came here, Forest Hills, developed this area. The Cord Meyer family, the Cord Meyer name, also importantly, is the guy who gave Forest Hills its name. He named it Forest Hills after the park, Forest Park, which we've already seen in this video, and helped plan the World's Fair, 1939 World's Fair here in Flushing Meadows, which is right nearby, the park here. I'll cover that in a video one day, but very important. Cord Meyer development company, still around today, believe it or not. So yeah, this is one of the oldest buildings here in Forest Hills, 1909. Not that old, but old for this area. Let's keep it moving. I'm rambling. Okay, so we talked about how Cord Meyer bought up a lot of land. Well, he started to sell it off. This guy's not stupid, right? One of the people he sold to was called, well, the group was called the Russell Sage Foundation. Now, Russell Sage was a railroad magnate. Back then, there were a lot of magnates. Makes me think that I should have majored in magnation or whatever, but, you know, did poli-sci instead, so here I am. But anyways, the Russell Sage Foundation buys 142 acres and develops this area that we're standing in right now called Forest Hills Gardens. Pretty cool, man. It's like a architecture here. You have the Forest Hill Inn. Now it's apartments, obviously, but this is a very fancy little neighborhood. Ain't no cheapskates here. That was kind of what the whole point was, make this little suburb, right? So this area has the actual train station back there. The Long Island Railroad passes right through. They made a little stop here in the early 1900s, which kind of made this whole little square. Now, this was actually inspired by a man named Sir Ebenezer Howard. That's right, his name was Ebenezer Howard. He looks exactly like you think he did, just like this. You know, you go into a barber shop, you tell them to give you the Ebenezer, they'll know exactly what you're talking about. But this guy pioneered a movement, yeah, through rain, sleet, or snow. Look at that. Anyways, this guy pioneered a movement known as the Garden City movement, where you use nature and you kind of surround it with the residential area, kind of creating this little self-contained community. In fact, the inspiration for this area was an area known as the Hampstead Garden suburb of London, right near the Hampstead Heath outside of the city. A lot of celebrities live there. People like Boy George, George Michael, Tim Burton, Jim Henson. That's what the kids would call a nightmare blunt rotation right there. But other people like Slash, Sting, and other, you know, verb-named people probably. That was one of the inspirations for this. So very, very pretty. You could see it. Also, it was a response to kind of what was happening in the late 1800s. A lot of very densely populated urban areas. You know, you think of like Charles Dickens, you know, in London, all that. People just kind of crowded in one area. You know, Oliver Twist. You know, the whole, you know, please, sir, can I have some more? That whole thing. It was a response to that. Get people to nature and all that, and you know they'll respond positively to that. Also, remember, this area was being developed in the early 1900s. The city was already a lost cause. Manhattan was already a lost cause. Even parts of Brooklyn, they didn't have the space to do stuff like this. They did here. So you have things like this developed in areas like Forest Hills, but also places like Jackson Heights, where the Queensboro Corporation developed its own Garden City apartments there too. Pretty cool. So the designer of this area was a guy named Grosvenor Atterbury, probably butchering that, but he was actually an apprentice at McKibben and White, which is one of the famous architectural firms of New York. And the person responsible for the gardens in the area, Frederick Law Olmsted Jr. Frederick Law Olmsted's kid. Pretty cool. Nepo baby. Really awesome, huh? And here behind me you have the Long Island Railroad station that went through here and was put here in the early 1900s, also helped to spur development in the area. And right there in 1917, to help sell this area, they got this famous speaker. His name was Teddy Roosevelt. Good old Teddy Roosevelt. Spoke up there, gave his speech. This is known as the 100% American speech, where he tells people you can't just be 50% American, you got to be 100% American. I know what that sounds like. It sounds like one of your uncle's rants at Thanksgiving. You know, the uncle that you block on Facebook. But no, I guess he was talking about it in the context of World War I. You had to be committed to, you know, beating the Europeans or whatever, so it was a different thing. Although not too different. Anyways, he gave it right up there on that little platform. Thousands of people. They still do July 4th celebrations. So this is just one of the areas of Forest Hills that was bought up and developed as little housing, suburban housing. That was the whole point. But you got to give people something to do. So what are we going to do? I don't know. Maybe I'll talk about it at the next stop. Now I'm talking fast. Got to get through this. Let's go. I'm also sunburning. Sunburning? All right. All right, so as people started to move here, you had to give people things to do. Now, the West Side Tennis Club was located here in the early 1900s, but in 1923, they start to think big, and they build what is today the Forest Hills Stadium. They built it to house basically, well, it houses up to 14,000 people, but it was the first and the biggest tennis stadium built in the United States. It was actually home to the national championship, which became the US Open in 1968. Pretty cool. So all the early greats played here. People like Don Budge, and Bob Tilden, you know, all the greats. But actually a lot of famous people have passed through here. In fact, Arthur Ashe famously won the first official US Open in 1968. By the way, the US Open went to Flushing Meadows in 1977. The actual stadium is named after him. He died of AIDS in 1993, very famous tennis player. But other famous people passed through here. People like, you know, Rene Lacoste, Pat? The shirt guy. So he was a tennis player who wore these shirts, tennis shirts, and his nickname was the Crocodile, which is why he got the little crocodile on all the Lacoste shirts. That's right, they called him the Crocodile because of how he would defeat his opponents. I guess he locked them in his jaws, rolled over, and drowned them all, but he was pretty fierce on the tennis court. You may recognize the little Lacoste brand shirts as, you know, the bros in the East Village wearing them while they're yelling, "Hey, Zach! Zach, the Uber's here! Hey, Zach! Hey, get Derek! Hey, Derek!" Yeah, those shirts. The Hey Derek shirts. But yeah, you have Rene Lacoste. You had a lot of famous people. Also, in 1960, they opened it up to concerts. And a lot of famous concerts passed through here. People like Bob Dylan is one of his famous shows. He played here after he went electric. And everyone freaked out. He came here, did it again. They booed him. You know, that was before people accepted, you know, different types of music from the people they liked. You know, I'm sure back then if Beyonce went on stage and started playing country, they would have thrown tomatoes at her. Simon and Garfunkel, who, by the way, went to Forest Hills High School, Go Rangers! Yeah, they went there, so they passed through and played here. Donna Summer, famous story here, this is kind of funny. Jimi Hendrix, early on in his career, 1967, the summer of 1967, he believe it or not, toured with the Monkees. Yeah, he toured with the Monkees for a little bit. Very different demographics. The Monkees were touring to like teenagers and their moms, and he would come out and open and just, you know, play Hey Joe. I'm sure the teenagers in the audience were like, OMG, it's giving cringe, But he didn't last, he only lasted like 7 dates with them, and he's like, screw this. He actually, and it was here at this concert where he gave the audience the finger and walked off stage because they hated his guts. Kind of funny. The stadium was actually built, at the time, was very expensive. It was a whopping $150,000. Yeah, it's a lot of money. Today that barely gets you one of the dumb Elon Musk trucks. Those dumb trucks you see are all over the place, but back then that was a lot of money. And today the West Side Tennis Club still operates the stadium. In fact, it was actually going to be torn down, but in like 2013 they refurbished it, made it all nice, and they, you know, started concerts here again. They got concerts here now. I'm sure the tickets are way too expensive. Yeah. Got to break up that Ticketmaster Live Nation merger, that's for sure. I haven't been to a concert in years. One of these days I'll be able to afford a concert, but yeah, pretty stadium, pretty cool story. West Side Tennis Club, Forest Hill Stadium. A lot of cool stuff here. Okay, so the 1930s comes around. Very important thing happens in 1936. The IND subway makes its way out to Forest Hills. Now this is important because the IND was actually a public line. Remember, the first 2 subway lines, which you can learn from my subway video, there you go, were actually private. This is interesting. They actually started a public line in the 1930s to basically beat up the private lines and basically sink them. And that's exactly what happened. Eventually the city takes over all the 3 lines and they all become public. But the IND made its way out here in 1936. In fact, one of the interesting reasons why they even created a public line was because of the Malbone accident, the subway accident right next to Prospect Park in 1918, where 100 people died because the private lines were using non-union conductors, the whole thing. You can learn about that on my Dark Side of Brooklyn video. I'm gonna plug these away. But all of this to say that this area started to grow even more quickly in the 1930s, and so you have all these new buildings created to cater to this growing neighborhood. Right behind me is the Midway Theater, which was actually built in 1942, named after the Battle of Midway. Go figure. You ever heard of that, Pat?
No.
It's a famous battle in the Pacific Theater of World War II, where it was between a bunch of battleships, Japanese boats getting sunk. And they actually made a movie about that called, I believe it was called Midway, but it was starring Charlton Heston, which is interesting because, ironically, this neighborhood has fought to keep buildings like this and basically saying to everybody that if you want to get rid of this, you're going to have to take it from our cold, dead hands. Or you just fund a city council person with election money. That's another way to do it. But yeah, you can go see, Bad Boys 10 or whatever's playing. Bad Boys 10, the boys at the retirement home in Miami causing a ruckus. You have other buildings right around here that were built around that time. The beautiful post office, built in 1937 in an international style with some Art Deco-ish features right down the street. You also have the Ridgewood Savings Bank, another little Art Deco-ish style. So these are all built around the 1930s, 1940s. Art Deco, by the way, named that because of l'Exposition d'Art Décoratif of Paris, France, in the 1920s, where a lot of architects took this style, built in the 1930s. So you have all these different things kind of going up, and including bigger apartment buildings. You also have those going up because more people moving out here, Starts to really take off, like a lot of Queens, once the subways are even more developed, got plugged in more to the city. Right? Pretty cool. And keep in mind that inside, at the time, was a 2,000-seat theater. It was an RKO theater, which was one of the companies, one of the big theater companies. This was actually designed by Thomas Lamb, who designed over 300 theaters in the United States. That's a ton. He actually famously designed the United Palace in Washington Heights. You can watch that in my video. Look at that. A lot of connections here. You better be watching these. Get your education. But this was one of his last theaters, actually, they say. And it's 2,000 seats, man. That's how many people were going to see movies back in the day. Today, you're watching on your phones, your kids on your phones. You could be sitting around with 1,900 of your closest friends watching Despicable Me 16. And this is in the Art Moderne style. You see the rounded corners, lots of long lines, squat, asymmetry, which is kind of interesting. It harkens back to what was going on in the late 1930s, 1940s, very malt shoppy, very lunch counter sit-in-y. That's kind of the style, I guess. Lots of different little styles here on Queens Boulevard, by the way. Queens Boulevard, like I think I've already mentioned, is one of the big thoroughfares here in Queens. It's been widened over time. Used to have trolleys, all kinds of things going on it, but still very, very wide and hard to cross and very annoying to be shooting in front of because I'm getting honked at a lot. I'm not a piece of meat. All right, let's keep it moving. Wow, we had ourselves a day, huh? We learned a lot. We had to cover a lot in like 20-something minutes, so, I couldn't cover everything, so relax. All right, goodness, I gave you something. So we did cover a lot. We went through the early history, the wilderness and farms. We went through the development, went through Cordmeyer, we went through Russell Sage, we went through Forest Hills Stadium and you know, all the new architecture, all that stuff. So there was a lot. Pat, did you learn something, most importantly?
Yeah, man, I learned so much.
Good, because that's all that really matters. That's not true. I use Pat as a stand-in for all of you fine folks. Thank you for making it all the way here. Pretty cool, made it to the end. Before we finish, guys, if you enjoyed it, check out the Patreon. That's a huge help. That's how we fund these things, baby. It's a new world we're living in. There's extras on there, all that stuff. Also, to like and subscribe. Huge help there. And you know what? Tell a friend. That's another thing you can do. That's kind of cool. If you can't do any of those other things, just send them a link. How about that? We'll grow this thing the old-fashioned way, word of mouth, which isn't just the best Ludacris album. It's also a way to market your stuff. Anyways, guys, we made it to the end. I don't know. I'm rambling. I hope you enjoyed it. I don't know what else more to tell you. I'm going to go walk around and, you know, get sunburned. Yeah. Give me that sweet sun while we have it. See y'all later. That's it. Yeah.